We've spent this entire journey studying what Seth taught, but I realize I've been avoiding a deeper question. Who or what was Seth? Was he a separate entity? A part of Jane's subconscious? A collective unconscious archetype? And what was the experience like for Jane? How did a skeptical poet from Elmira become the channel for one of the most significant spiritual texts of the 20th century?
I am not Jane Roberts. I am Seth. I have lived many lives. I am an energy personality essence, no longer focused in physical reality.
Okay, that quote from Seth Speaks, it always gives me absolute chills.
Oh, completely. It's so direct, you know?
Yeah, uncompromising. Like, we usually treat the Seth teachings as this finalized product. We treat the books like these immaculate texts that just magically appeared on a shelf.
Right, like they fell out of the sky.
Exactly. But today, we are doing something entirely different. For you, the listener, we are setting a very specific mission for this deep dive. Today, we are stepping firmly behind the curtain of the teachings themselves to explore the channeling phenomenon itself.
Yeah.
We are looking at the meta layer of the entire Seth material.
Which is, it's so necessary because our objective today is to really look at the actual granular mechanics of how multidimensional information is somehow like squeezed into three-dimensional words.
Squeeze is the perfect word for it.
It really is. And just as importantly, we need to understand the profoundly human vessel that made all of this possible. Because, you just cannot separate the message from the messenger.
No, you can't.
Yeah.
And to really grasp the magnitude of what happened, we need to bypass all those New Age tropes.
Oh, definitely.
Like, this isn't a story of a serene mystic meditating in a Himalayan cave who suddenly receives, perfect enlightenment. To understand this phenomenon, we have to transport ourselves back to a very grounded, gritty time and place.
Late 1963.
Right. Late 1963 in Elmira, New York. I want you to really picture this context. It's just an ordinary apartment. Jane Roberts is a poet. She's a writer of science fiction and fantasy.
A very earthly person.
Very.
Yeah.
And her husband, Rob Butts, is a commercial artist. They're regular, hardworking people. And they're casually experimenting with a Ouija board.
And we really must emphasize the context of that experiment, too. Because they weren't seeking a spiritual guru.
Right. They weren't sitting around lighting incense.
Exactly. They weren't looking for religious salvation or anything like that. Jane was simply trying to gather ideas for a fiction book she wanted to write about extrasensory perception.
It was research.
It was purely intellectual research. It was casual, almost playful at first.
Well, it started because Jane had this strange, spontaneous experience just a few weeks prior, right? Like in September of 1963.
Yes, the automatic writing.
Yeah. She was just sitting at her desk writing poetry, and suddenly her consciousness basically leaves her body. And when she comes back to normal awareness, she finds her hands have produced this huge automatic script called The Physical Universe as Idea Construction.
Which is an incredibly dense philosophical treatise.
And that terrified her. But, it also sparked her relentless intellectual curiosity. So they get a Ouija board to see if they can, tap back into that subconscious space.
Just to see what happens.
Right. And after a few sessions, the pointer just begins spelling out messages.
Yeah, the pointer starts moving across the board with incredible speed, like way faster than they could consciously push it. And it spells out that it is a personality calling itself Seth.
And Jane's reaction to this is so telling.
It really is.
Her reaction is not, oh, wonderful, a benevolent spirit guide is finally here to bless us. Her reaction is just sheer, unadulterated terror.
She genuinely thought she was losing her mind.
She really did. She thought she was suffering a severe psychological break.
You have to view this through the lens of a highly intelligent, skeptical woman in the early 1960s. I mean, the psychological frameworks of that time didn't leave much room for, energy personality essences.
Definitely not. You were either entirely sane, operating with a singular ego, or you were experiencing a pathological dissociative state.
Exactly. There's no middle ground. And for a writer, someone whose intellect, whose very mind was her entire livelihood and identity, the idea of another autonomous personality speaking through her was basically an existential threat.
It meant she was broken.
Right. It was terrifying for her.
But then there's Rob. And I feel like we really can't overstate Rob's role in this whole process.
Oh, Rob is the unsung hero of the Seth material.
He is the anchor in this storm.
Yeah.
He's this grounded, skeptical artist who decides, instead of panicking, to just sit there and take meticulous shorthand notes of everything that happens.
Which is amazing.
It is.
Yeah.
And because he created that safe analytical container, the dynamic begins to shift in a very dramatic physical way.
The transition from the physical Ouija board to direct voice is a fascinating study in neurological adaptation because Jane realized that she didn't actually need the board anymore.
She was anticipating the letters.
Yes, she began to hear the words in her head a split second before the pointer even moved to the letters. Her nervous system was essentially learning to translate the impulse directly. Okay. And then the physical transformation just took over. She would go into this deep trance state.
And the physical details of that shift are striking. If you read Rob's notes, he describes it with an artist's eye for detail. Like, Jane's eyes would darken, the pupils would dilate until they were almost entirely black.
Yeah, taking on this luminous, penetrating quality.
And there was this characteristic physical gesture she'd do.
The tossing of the glasses.
Yes. She would just pull off her heavy, dark-rimmed glasses and casually toss them onto the couch.
Like she didn't need physical sight anymore.
Exactly. And then, out of this petite, 82-pound woman from upstate New York would emerge this booming, deep, masculine voice.
The very distinct accent that nobody could ever quite pinpoint.
Right. Was it Russian? Was it Italian?
Nobody knew. It wasn't just a change in vocal pitch, though. It was an entirely different biological and psychological posture. Seth had a jovial, commanding presence.
He really did.
He was an energetic, educated gentleman of the old school. He was highly intelligent, possessed a wonderful, booming laugh, and had a very sharp, sometimes sarcastic sense of humor.
He did not hold back.
No, he didn't. He would look around the room, interacting with Rob, making jokes, but at the same time delivering this incredibly dense, profound philosophical material without a single pause.
Or hesitation.
Yeah.
Or grammatical error, which forces us to stop and really analyze the entity himself. Who was Seth? We heard that direct quote at the beginning. He defines himself as an energy personality essence, no longer focused in physical reality.
Right.
Let's really unpack the mechanics of that for the listener. What does that actually mean in the context of the Seth material?
Well, it means we have to completely discard our conventional folklore ideas of a spirit or a ghost.
Oh, totally. No floating white sheets.
Exactly. Seth is very clear that he is not some deceased relative floating around in the ether with, like, unfinished earthly business.
Right.
He describes an identity that operates in many dimensions simultaneously. He explained his reincarnational history, that he had lived many lives on Earth as both male and female in various time periods and probable realities.
So he's huge.
He is a gestalt of consciousness that had graduated, so to speak, from the need for physical manifestation entirely.
But let me push back on this, because this is where the danger lies for anyone studying this material. When you have a booming voice coming from the beyond, delivering profound, cosmic truths about the nature of the universe, isn't there a massive temptation to put that entity on a pedestal?
Oh, huge.
I mean, sure, Seth said, "Don't treat me like a god," but isn't that what every guru says right before people build a religion around them? How did Jane and Rob actively prevent a cult from forming around their living room?
That is the crucial question, and it's exactly why Jane and Rob were the perfect receivers for this material. They actively resisted the guru trap, and Seth demanded that resistance.
He didn't want followers.
He vehemently refused to let anyone fall into religious credulity. If a guest came to a session, and many did, and asked Seth to solve their earthly problems or tell them what to do with their lives, Seth would sharply redirect them back to their own power.
He didn't offer crutches.
Absolutely not. He explicitly stated in Seth Speaks, there is no personal God individual in Christian terms. He presented himself solely as a teacher.
Just a teacher.
Just a teacher. He was a personality from a broader dimension offering a map of consciousness, but he insisted that you must walk the territory yourself. He warned constantly that the answers to our questions about reality lie within ourselves, not with him.
Right. His entire mission was simply to remind us of the multidimensional heritage we have culturally forgotten.
Exactly.
But the rabbit hole of this multidimensional heritage goes even deeper. Because if Seth is an energy personality essence, what happens when we zoom out even further? Behind Seth, there was something else that emerged in the sessions, this staggering concept of Seth 2.
Yes. The oversoul, the Seth entity.
It's just wild to think about.
It really is, because
Yeah.
if the idea of Seth challenges our conventional concepts of personality, Seth 2 completely shatters them. Seth describes Seth 2 as standing relatively in the same position to him as he stood to Jane.
So it's a fractal hierarchy.
Yes.
Seth is to Jane what Seth 2 is to Seth, an even vaster gestalt of consciousness.
Precisely. Seth, too, was not a personality in any human relatable sense. It represented a vast, almost incomprehensible, impersonal field of knowledge.
It sounds intimidating.
It was. Seth, too, rarely spoke directly in the sessions, but when it did, the physical toll on Jane and the visceral experience she underwent was completely different than when she channeled the jovial Seth.
The descriptions of this in Rob's notes are wild. Jane described it as feeling a massive weight, like a cone or pyramid coming down over her head.
She felt her consciousness traveling up an invisible flue, leaving her physical body far, far behind.
Wait, let's pause on that invisible flu feeling. It's like her consciousness was being pulled up out of her physical brain, stretching her psychological elasticity to its absolute limit just to make contact.
It was incredibly taxing for her.
And the voice of Seth, too, was nothing like the booming, laughing Seth. It was high, distant, deliberate, almost delicate, as if this vaster consciousness wasn't familiar with vocal cords or the clumsy mechanics of physical speech at all.
Right, like
Yeah.
it didn't know how to use a human mouth.
Exactly. It was an asexual voice that spoke with incredibly slow, painstaking precision.
It's a perfect illustration of the multidimensional framework the Seth material presents. You have Jane, the focused physical self, dealing with the daily reality of space and time.
Right?
Then you have Seth, the inner teacher, the energy personality essence, who has known physical life but is now operating in broader dimensions. And then you have Seth, too, the oversoul, the massive energy gestalt from which Seth himself emerges.
But what makes this so critical for you, listening right now, is that this hierarchy isn't a special anomaly unique to Jane Roberts.
No, not at all. That is the master key to the entire teaching. This structure, the physical self, the inner teacher, the oversoul, perfectly mirrors the psychological structure of every single human being.
Everyone listening.
Everyone. Seth was demonstrating, through Jane's vocal cords, the latent capacities that exist within the listener. We all have a physical focus, we all have an inner self or inner teacher, and we all belong to a vaster entity or oversoul.
Jane simply learned how to build a psychological bridge to those other parts of her being and vocalize them.
Exactly. She just mapped the territory.
So is Seth real, or a projection of Jane's psyche?
Seth would say those are not mutually exclusive. Consciousness is not confined to a single body. Seth was a valid personality essence that Jane's particular neurological makeup allowed her to receive and translate.
Let's really analyze that translation process, that psychological bridge. Because if I'm a modern psychologist looking at Jane tossing her glasses and adopting a male persona, I'm not seeing dimensions.
Right, you're seeing pathology.
Exactly. I'm diagnosing dissociative identity disorder. I'm calling it archetypal possession. How do we reconcile the clinical view with the metaphysical one?
Well, modern psychology demands that the ego be a tightly closed, solitary system. Any breach of that system is automatically pathologized.
Because it threatens the idea of a single self.
Right. But Jane herself, who analyzed her own trance states ruthlessly in books like The God of Jane, argued that her experience had nothing to do with classical pathological dissociation.
She was very defensive about her sanity.
And rightfully so. She pointed out a very pragmatic fact. Her trances produced highly developed, incredibly complex, internally consistent philosophical masterpieces.
Over decades.
Over 20 years. A pathological break does not produce cohesive, sustained, brilliant intellectual frameworks. A fragmented mind produces fragmented material. Jane was producing genius.
It's like trying to force a high-definition 4K movie file through a 1990s dial-up modem.
Oh, that's a brilliant analogy.
The data of Seth's multidimensional concepts is so massive, so beyond linear time, that Jane's physical brain has to act as a compression algorithm. Her neurology has to compress it, drop frames, and translate it into an English vocabulary that the physical world can actually download.
That perfectly explains the concept of the flow state.
Oh.
Seth actually likened the channeling process to the ultimate flow state.
Really? Just like a regular artist?
Yes. He said that all creativity involves a degree of channeling. When a writer loses themselves in a story, or a musician is improvising and feels like the music is playing them, they're accessing a flow state where the inspiration is coming from beyond the conscious, egotistical mind.
They're getting out of their own way.
Exactly. They're tapping into the inner senses. Jane simply took this natural, innate human process and extended it much further than most.
But because it requires that human modem, it wasn't a clean, unadulterated transmission. There is an unavoidable distortion, right?
Mm-hmm.
The 4K movie loses some pixels when it goes through the dial-up connection.
This is one of the most intellectually honest parts of the Seth material. Seth explicitly states that whether a medium is in a trance as deep as the Atlantic Ocean, they will never be a pure, undistorted channel.
So the channeler always colors the message.
Always. The information must be squeezed through Jane's specific neurological structures.
It has to pass through the filter of her physical brain waves, her specific vocabulary, her cultural context as an American woman in the 20th century.
Right. Exactly. Seth offered a beautiful metaphor for this. He said, I am not Rupert's subconscious, though I speak through it. It is the atmosphere through which I can come to you, as the air is the atmosphere through which a bird flies.
Rupert being his name for Jane.
Yes. And the point of the metaphor is that the bird is entirely independent of the air, but its flight, its aerodynamics, are shaped by the wind, the pressure, the elements of that specific atmosphere.
So the channeling is a joint creation.
A deeply collaborative joint creation. Seth provided the raw, non-physical conceptual energy, and Jane's subconscious and physical apparatus provided the clothing, the words, the syntax required to make it perceptible in our three-dimensional reality.
And that joint creation, that deeply intertwined relationship between the message and the messenger, is why we cannot truly understand the Seth material without looking directly at Jane Roberts herself.
You have to look at the atmosphere to understand the flight.
Exactly. We have to ground these lofty, esoteric concepts in the gritty, flawed, profoundly human reality of Jane.
Because the truth is, spiritual greatness requires human authenticity, not perfection. And Jane was about as far from the stereotypical perfect spiritual vessel as you can imagine.
I love Jane's character profile so much. She is such an unlikely vessel. When you read New Age literature, there's often this expectation of the channeler being serene, glowing, speaking in soft, hushed tones, burning incense on a mountaintop.
Completely devoid of earthly desire.
Right. But Jane was an earthy, chain-smoking, beer-drinking woman from upstate New York. She had a sharp tongue, a fierce intellect, and a deeply ingrained skepticism.
She never claimed to be a saint, and she actively, aggressively resisted anyone who tried to treat her like one.
And the burden of being this channel was immense for her. We look back and romanticize it, but it wasn't a purely joyful experience where she just sat back and bathed in cosmic light. She struggled intensely with the demands of her abilities.
We have to remember her primary identity. She was a writer.
Right, she had her own work.
She wanted to write her own poetry, her own science fiction, her own philosophical explorations. She had a deeply complicated, often reluctant relationship with the fame that the Seth books brought.
She didn't want the spotlight in that way.
She worried constantly about her professional credibility. She didn't want to be known as a spook worker, as she called it.
There were times she actually resented Seth, didn't she?
Absolutely. She resented the sheer amount of time the sessions took. While Rob was transcribing shorthand and typing up the Seth books, Jane felt her own creative time was being usurped by this massive entity.
That's so profoundly human.
And the public pressure was enormous. As the books gained popularity, people sought her out. They wrote desperately to her, showing up unannounced at her door, expecting her to be a magical healer, expecting Seth to solve all their earthly problems.
And she violently rejected that projection.
She hated it. She refused to play the role of the savior. She knew that Seth's core message was about individual empowerment, that you create your own reality, and yet people were coming to her completely giving away their power.
Asking her to fix their marriages, their finances, their physical ailments.
It frustrated her to no end because it meant they were entirely missing the point of the material.
Wait, I don't just want to skip over this.
Yeah.
We have to sit with the gravity of this irony. Because her frustration with people asking her to fix their physical ailments brings us to the most poignant, difficult, and paradoxical aspect of Jane's entire journey.
Yes, the arthritis.
How does the channeler of the nature of personal reality, a text entirely dedicated to the premise that you create your own reality, including your own physical health, how does she suffer from severe, immobilizing rheumatoid arthritis?
It is the central paradox of her life, and it's a profound psychological puzzle that advanced students of the material grapple with constantly.
It's the elephant in the room.
You look at the later years of her life, and Jane was largely confined to a wheelchair and eventually a hospital bed, her body rigid, her joints immobilized by this brutal disease.
And from the outside, critics look at that and say, well, if she creates her own reality, why doesn't she just uncreate the arthritis? If Seth is so smart, why didn't he heal her?
But the reality of psychological creation is never that simplistic. We can't just gloss over this with toxic positivity.
No, let's do a deep psychological analysis of this, based on the notes Rob left and the private sessions Seth gave. Why did her psyche essentially encase her body in concrete?
To understand the arthritis, you have to deeply understand the concept of Jane's sinful self.
Okay, unpack that for me.
Jane grew up in a very strict, traditional Catholic environment with a mother who was severely physically disabled herself and deeply bitter.
That's heavy conditioning.
Exactly. Even though Jane left the church intellectually in her late teens, the deep subconscious emotional conditioning remained. The concept of original sin, of being inherently flawed, guilty, and needing to strive for an impossible superhuman purity, was baked into the deepest layers of her psyche.
So she has this latent, terrifying subconscious guilt, and then she suddenly finds herself channeling cosmic knowledge. She's accessing multidimensional realities, speaking for an oversoul.
Right, and her subconscious, that sinful self, loaded with Catholic guilt, was utterly terrified. It created a superhuman expectation of perfection.
Because if she's going to wield this power, she has to be flawless.
She felt that because she had these profound psychic abilities, she had to be morally perfect, she couldn't make a mistake, she had to somehow save the world. It was an unbearable psychological burden.
Wait, so the arthritis wasn't a failure of her channeling, but a bizarre defense mechanism. Like her subconscious was throwing on the emergency brake because her psychic abilities were accelerating too fast.
Exactly. Seth explained that Jane refused a miracle cure because she insisted on working through her own psychological blocks. She wasn't a victim of a random disease. She was actively, subconsciously utilizing the symptoms.
That's incredibly grave, but also so tragic.
Her psyche encased her body in rigid physical immobility to protect her.
To protect her from losing her grounding in physical reality. Her abilities were so vast, so boundless, that she was terrified she would fly off into the cosmos and never come back, or that she would lead people astray with her power.
Yes, the fear of misusing the power.
The physical pain, the stiffness, the literal inability to move freely, it was a brutal physical grounding mechanism.
It was her subconscious way of saying, I am anchoring you here in this physical body, in this chair, so you do not go too fast, too far. She turned down her own physical thermostat, as Seth put it, using the symptoms to intensify her focus inward and restrict her physical movement outward.
She traded physical mobility for psychic vastness.
She did.
How often do we do that? I mean, how often do we manifest our own arthritis, a physical block, a sudden illness, a panic attack, a self-sabotaging behavior, because our subconscious is terrified of our own potential?
We all have our own emergency brakes.
It's a tragic but incredibly profound illustration of the very principle Seth taught. Our beliefs, even our deeply hidden, fearful subconscious beliefs, manifest as physical reality. She was literally manifesting her internal rigidity and her fear of her own boundless power into the physical joints of her body.
And she faced it with an incredible, stubborn courage. When she finally went into the hospital in 1982, which was a grueling experience with severe thyroid issues, hearing loss, bed sores, she was forced to confront that superhuman, perfect self-image.
It must have been devastating.
It shattered. She couldn't be the perfect psychic savior when she was relying on nurses to lift her 82-pound body onto a commode. The sheer vulnerability stripped away the sinful self's demands.
And through it all, she kept going. This is the human legacy that I find so incredibly moving. Despite the crippling rheumatoid arthritis, despite the severe physical pain, the constant financial worries they had in the early years, the sheer emotional exhaustion of navigating this global phenomena for over 20 years, Jane Roberts showed up.
She sat in her Kennedy rocking chair, 2 nights a week, year after year, decade after decade.
And Rob Butts sat right there with her, with his meticulous shorthand, transcribing every single word to ensure the world got this material intact.
The dedication, the stamina of that partnership is staggering. They gave the world a body of work that has influenced millions, a philosophical framework that fundamentally shifts how we view the universe, the nature of God, and our place within it.
And this is the ultimate takeaway for you, the listener, regarding Jane's journey. Her humanity is just as important as Seth's teachings.
Oh, absolutely.
She was not a perfect vessel. She was flawed, she was stubborn, she was fearful, she was in physical pain. And that is the point.
You do not need to be perfectly healed. You do not need to be perfectly enlightened or sitting in a state of unblemished zen to access profound universal truths.
You can just be you.
Jane was a courageous, flawed human being who opened a door. She proved that the connection to the divine, to the multidimensional self, to the oversoul, is available to us right here, right now, in our messy, imperfect, chain-smoking, earthly reality.
If Jane, a flawed, skeptical, earthly human being, could access Seth, And if Seth explicitly stated that we all have an inner teacher, that we are all multidimensional beings, then channeling is not a supernatural anomaly reserved for special chosen ones.
It is a biological and psychological birthright. It is a natural human capacity.
And Seth gave us the tools to begin accessing it. We don't need a Ouija board, and you don't need to throw your glasses across the room and speak in a booming trance voice.
Thank goodness for that.
Right. You simply need to turn your focus inward and begin to practice utilizing your inner senses.
And how do we actually do that? Because saying turn your focus inward sounds great in theory, but sitting down and trying to consciously build that psychological bridge can feel incredibly abstract.
It can feel like you're just making it up.
Exactly. Seth taught extensively about the inner senses. We are so completely focused on our physical senses, sight, sound, touch, that we ignore the inward perceiving mechanisms that are constantly running in the background.
We just tune them out.
I'm going to guide you through this exact advanced inquiry right now. If you are in a place where you can safely do so, I want you to try this. Sit quietly, take several deep breaths, set the intention, I wish to connect with my inner teacher.
Just that simple intention.
Yes. And then you begin to utilize what Seth called psychological time.
What does that feel like?
This is the practice of momentarily bypassing the physical senses. You close your eyes, and instead of focusing on the ticking of the clock or the ambient noise in the room, you allow your consciousness to drift inward. You literally feel for the spaciousness of time that isn't measured by seconds or minutes.
Like the space between thoughts.
It's the feeling you get just before you fall asleep, where time seems to expand and dilate. You hold your awareness in that expanded space.
It's like turning down the volume on the physical world so you can finally hear the subtle frequencies of the inner world. And another inner sense he talked about was inner vibrational touch.
Yes, the ability to empathically project your consciousness outward, not just looking at a tree, but feeling the essence of the tree, or feeling the emotional reality of another person without losing your own identity.
Cultivating empathy on a vibrational level.
By practicing these inner senses, you are actively building your own psychological bridge. You are learning to recognize the specific personogram, the unique energetic signature of your own inner guidance.
And it might not come as a booming voice.
It probably won't.
It might come as a sudden, brilliant intuition, a vividly symbolic dream, an impulse that leads you to a breakthrough at work. It is the language of the inner self translating multidimensional knowledge into your daily life.
Which brings us full circle to the very nature of consciousness itself.
And that leads me to a final provocative thought for you to carry with you. Something that wasn't explicitly spelled out in the main discussion, but that builds on everything we've unpacked today about the Oversoul.
Okay, let's hear it.
We talked about Seth 2. Seth mentioned that Seth 2 was, in a loose analogy, a future or more highly developed version of himself, that they existed simultaneously, but Seth 2 represented a vaster comprehension.
A fascinating concept of simultaneous time and spiritual growth. The idea that your future self already exists and is broadcasting back to you.
Right. So extrapolate that to your own life. What if the sudden bursts of intuition you have? What if the moments of profound artistic inspiration, or that deep, inexplicable comfort you sometimes feel in the middle of a terrible crisis? What if those aren't just random neurological firings or wishful thinking?
Mind-blowing.
What if those are actually transmissions from your own future, fully realized Oversoul? What if we are all constantly, in every single moment, receiving our own personalized Seth material, but we've just been culturally conditioned to dismiss it as daydreams or imagination?
It changes the entire paradigm of how you view your own thoughts. It turns every intuitive nudge into a communication from the deepest, most evolved part of your being. You become your own channel.
We started this deep dive talking about the diagnostic muddy waters of consciousness, how trying to categorize the soul is like trying to read a 4K multi-dimensional reality through a 1990s dial-up modem.
Yeah.
But maybe the goal isn't to get a clean, perfectly uncompressed file. Maybe the goal is to realize that the murkiness, the mystery, the vast uncharted depths of your own psyche are exactly where the magic happens. The waters are only muddy because they are deeper than we ever dared to imagine. I want to leave you sitting with that silence and that possibility.